This is a huge pleasure. This is a massive honor for me. Neo Home Loans was created, what we call our mission or just cause, is to improve communities and neighborhoods by spreading financial literacy. And so tonight we get to do just that, and to be able to do it with you, Drake, and with a great group is a real pleasure and an honor for me. So thanks for being here with me.
My pleasure. I'm excited as well. That's one of my favorite topics.
And for those of you who don't know us intimately well, I'm Josh Metal, one of the co-creators of Neo Home Loans. My partner, drake.bloebaum, mortgage advisor with Neo Home Loans. And many of you may know this, but over the last 20 years, Drake and I have really been on a mission, if you will, to invest in real estate and to really build a secure retirement through the cash flow from our real estate assets, as opposed to kind of building a lump sum retirement that we plan to sell off or cannibalize through retirement. And so that's been a really fun journey. We've learned a tremendous amount. And I think a lot of that, hopefully that experience, that real world experience as a real estate investor, hopefully a lot of that will come through and will be valuable with what we share tonight. So with that, I've officially wasted 4 minutes of time, and I think we should jump in. So our topic tonight, let's see, let me get my other screen up here. Hold on one second. My Zoom screens are not functioning right. Just give me 2 seconds to fix this, and we'll be good to go. Here we go. Boom. Slideshow. Okay. Now we're in good shape. Bear with me. Zoom, share. Everything is right in the world. Okay. All right. So just imagine if we could keep our 2 or 3 or 4% mortgage rate that we love so much. I mean, I know I love mine. But imagine if we could keep that mortgage and buy the home that we really want to move our families into. And that's the question that we want to answer here today, is how could that be? And is it possible to turn that existing home into a rental property, buy a new home with very little money down? So we're going to talk big picture first. We're going to talk about the problem with, as we see it, with retirement funds, traditional retirement funds. We're going to show you an alternate path. And then we're going to get really specific and granular. So the last 15 minutes of this presentation, before we kind of dive into significant Q&A, we're going to get very tactical on the step-by-step process by which you would turn your home into a rental and procure a new home. So make sure you stick around for that. So just by means of kind of summarizing or framing up the challenge as we see it, I found this slide that I thought was really interesting. This came from the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances. And basically what it does is it shows how much retirement assets, stocks, bonds, 401ks, IRAs, Roths, that kind of stuff, how much retirement assets do households have? And this lower section is the one that I thought was really interesting. Those aged 55 to 64, those households that do have retirement assets, on average, they have about $100,000 in retirement assets. But 40% of American households have no retirement assets, no stock, no 401k, no IRA, no qualified retirement funds. And so if you averaged out the amount of retirement assets across all households in the United States, it only averages $12,000. So obviously this is massively underfunded. According to the National Institute of Retirement Security, their research finds that those US households approaching retirement age are underfunded somewhere between $6.8 and $14 trillion. Obviously, that's a big estimate. You could drive a lot of Mack trucks through 6.8 to 14 trillion. But the point is that we are on a path that, by and large, is not serving the majority of Americans. And in addition to those challenges with retirement fundings, now we have all these questions around Social Security. So I'm going to read you a few things right from the Social Security Administration.gov website, and you might find this alarming as I did. So, I highlighted here, it says, on average, Social Security will replace 40% of your annual pre-retirement earnings. So, many people may not realize that it's not meant to fully subsidize retirement. It's only supposed to subsidize 40%. And, if you took 40% of your current income and adjust for inflation, that may not bring about the retirement that we were all envisioning. This is another excerpt I found on the Social Security website. It says the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund will be able to pay 100% of total scheduled benefits until 2033. So everybody that's going to be done with retirement by 2033, you have nothing to worry about. And they said that's 1 year earlier than reported last year. And at that time, the fund's reserves will become depleted and continuing program income will be sufficient to pay 77% of the scheduled benefits. So that'd be 77% of 40% of your pre-retirement income. And oh, by the way, that just this year when they reran these numbers, they said, oh no, we're not going to be able to pay 100% to 2034, only to 2033. So my point is that's a moving target. And the surety or the safety around Social Security just seems to be shrinking to me as people live longer. And we're already seeing stuff like this in France, right? We saw the riots over the retirement age. Wasn't the retirement age changed by 1 year, Drake? Wasn't that the difference?
I think it was 2.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So I believe that this is something that we're going to see in probably every developed nation that has retirement Social Security type funding. As people are living into their 80s and 90s, it wasn't anticipated that people would live that long and would need retirement assets. And so they're going to have to rescale these things. There's going to be a major overhauling likely in the next 10 years around these. And so the idea here is if you are one of the households that don't have enough retirement assets for you to feel fully comfortable, you're underfunded like most of American households, and you're not confident in the fact that Social Security is going to be around in the way that we had hoped it would be, then perhaps it's time for us to start to look for another path. And Drake, I think I'll turn these different paths over to you to explain.
Yeah. So as Josh mentioned, sort of the old way of building a retirement, like many of our parents did, was, you'd work at a job, GM, at GE, one of these big companies for 40 years. And when you retire, you would get a pension from them and you'd get Social Security, and that would make up your retirement and it would last the rest of your life. So, the historical way to do things was, you go to college, get a job, get a degree, avoid debt, and save money, and didn't need to save all that much money because your pension and Social Security would take care of it for you. Well, now hardly anyone has a pension anymore, and a lot of even those pension funds are starting to change. And so we've got to look at retirement in a new way, right? I believe you need to be a little bit of an entrepreneur. You have to have financial literacy. You have to use some leverage, and you have to invest. You can't just put money in a savings account and expect that it's going to get there. You have to beat inflation and grow your wealth faster than inflation so that you're going to have enough to retire. And I would argue it's, in running the numbers a lot, it's hard. I believe it's going to be really hard for the average person to have a comfortable retirement without using some sort of real estate, because the amounts of money that you have to get to in order to have enough assets to draw down a comfortable retirement on a monthly basis the numbers are just massive. And so the beautiful thing about real estate is it's sort of inherently using leverage because you're typically using a loan, right? When you buy a $400,000 home, you put 5 to 20 or whatever you decide to put down, that's leverage. And so another great thing about real estate is that you're building those cash flows, and those cash flows, I think of those cash flows as like creating my own pension fund, right? Or my own social security account. So in other words, we're not building this large nest egg of funds, like Josh said, that we're going to then draw down and hope we die before we run out of money. We're going to build these cash flows that continue over time, like a business, right? I think of my real estate as little ATMs that just print out money for me on a monthly basis. So anyway, the old way versus the new way. Should we do next?
Lost my mute button. Sorry, Drake.
Okay.
I was saying I love that distinction, and the reality is, we kind of do a mix of both, right? We have retirement assets in traditional 401k, Roth, HSA accounts, but really what we're depending on to get us through from a cash flow perspective and a quality of life perspective is the cash flow from those real estate. So I think that you don't necessarily have to be one or the other, but to meld those two paths together gives you the ultimate diversification and the ultimate layer of safety. And the challenge around real estate is that there has been a really incredibly negative narrative around housing. Really, it's never really changed coming out of the Great Recession and the housing crash. So this is a series of quotes that I think you're going to kind of explain to us, right, Trey?
Yeah. So these are from CNBC. Their sort of head real estate reporter is Diana Olick. And so, basically, we would argue that sort of this is what the average American, this is the kind of news and headlines that the average American is seeing and seeing and absorbing and taking into their psyche. And so let's just take a look at this. So assuming you bought a $300,000 home in 2015, right? That's where this starts in the top right corner. If you had listened to the news that year and heard that housing today was a bubble larger than 2006, you bought a $300,000 home, or you decided not to buy one, you would have missed out on 5% appreciation that year, which is $15,000. So then a few years later, in 2017, they say homeownership doesn't build wealth, study finds. Well, that year, if you would have listened to those and not bought, you would have missed out on 6%. So you missed out on $20,000 of appreciation, so on and so forth, right? Right before, during the pandemic, July 2021, the housing boom is over as new home sales fall to pandemic low. That year, you would have missed out on 18% appreciation, or $80,000 on your $300,000 home you bought, six years ago. So over that period of time, if you would have listened to Diana Olick on CNBC, you'd have missed out on $222,000 of appreciation. So this is what a lot of people are hearing, right? We just have to remember that the news is there to sell eyeballs and sell attention for ads. So when they can peddle sensational headlines, that's them doing their job.
And we really saw this when interest rates went up to 7% late last year. There was a massive slowdown in the number of sales. And in Utah, the best data that I have, Drake, is that our home values from July of 2022 to January of 2023 dropped about 7%. But that was after 2 years we had an 18% appreciation year and a 22% appreciation year. So you're talking about excess of 40% appreciation in 24 months, which is insane. And then after that, even the 7% interest rates only brought home values back down 7%. So people that were in their house for 2 years were still up over 30%. But you heard the negative news come about, oh my gosh, this is it. This is the housing crash. The housing market is in a recession. It's getting obliterated. Well, yes, the number of sales slowed significantly because affordability was a challenge, but values actually didn't do too bad. And since January have bottomed and are back up and have recouped about half of the 7% that they lost between July last year and January. So Drake, what do institutions know that most American households aren't hearing from Diana Olick?
Yeah, so you know, your average American is listening to the news and reading the newspaper and getting probably lots of information from social media, I would imagine these days. But Wall Street, meanwhile, is looking at the demographics. And what the demographics show is that there's just not enough homes for the number of Americans that need homes. I don't think it shows it in this slide, but it's several million homes that we're short. So we have some other slides and other presentations where we talk about household formation versus home completions. And basically, since about 2008, during the Great Recession, builders have been underbuilding by millions of homes every year. And so there's this structural insufficient amount of homes for the number of people that need to buy homes. And so Wall Street sees these demographics and they're piling in, hedge funds are piling in to buy single family rentals. One of those people is Don Mullen, who is the founder of Pretty and Partners. And he was quoted as saying, real estate is a much more attractive investment opportunity than it was in 2008. This was in January of 2023 at what we would argue is probably the very bottom of the most recent housing downturn, right? He was saying, this is the time to buy. So I quote Warren Buffett a lot and say, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. I think at this moment, that's what Don Mullen was seeing. He was seeing sort of maximum pessimism in the most people's minds, and that's when he was seeing the opportunity to buy.
And this blows my mind, the amount of single family homes he's bought.
Yeah, these guys have 51 billion in assets under management. They're in single family residences across the country. And so this is what they're seeing as well, right? This is the average cumulative appreciation since 1991. Nationwide is 300%. So if you bought a $100,000 home in 1991, it's worth $300,000 that many years later. So yeah, I think we have a couple of bullet points on this slide. Is that right? An example?
Yeah, we're going to actually kind of break down, when you talk about return on investment, it's not, it wouldn't be accurate to just say, well, Utah's appreciated 587% because most of us didn't pay cash for our homes. We applied financing. So feel free to walk through this, Drake.
Yeah. So if you bought a $200,000 home in 1991, which was a nice home at that time, in 2023, it would have been worth $1.176 million. And so, I've direct personal experience with this. Like when we moved to Utah in 1987, and my parents bought a $125,000 home. For those of you in Utah, like in the 15th and 15th area, which was before it was cool. And it nowadays that property would easily sell for $1.25 million. So I've seen this in my lifetime. So in this case, if you were buying your $200,000 home, you're putting 10% down. So that's using the leverage that we were talking about earlier, right? You're using 90% leverage. So you put $20,000 down, but you get the appreciation on the entire $200,000. That's one of the most powerful things in real estate. And then so that makes your return on investment over that time 5,800% ROI, which is why that's what leverage does for you, right? You turn 20,000 into over $1 million.
Absolutely incredible. Not to mention you locked in the cost of your house over 30 years because your mortgage payment was presumably the same, or perhaps you even refinanced and got a lower payment over time. but you didn't have inflation pushing up your housing costs other than perhaps taxes and insurance over that period of time.
Yeah.
All right. This is pretty incredible.
Yeah, this is cool. So this is appreciation year by year since 1942. So through the decades, right? So the 40s were rolling. There were 129% appreciation. And so as we go through these decades, you're going to see all the numbers in green mean that real estate was up for the year. So 1942 it was up 3%, 1943, 11, et cetera. And so those all are cumulative to the right, adding up to 129%. The 50s, not so strong of a decade, but still 36%. We have a couple of 0 years in there. The 60s, again, a little slower, but still appreciated every decade by a little bit. 70s, we're back firing again. Let's think about what was starting to happen in the 70s, right? We were starting to see inflation, right? And so that was pushing home prices up. 80s, again, 77%. We still haven't had a losing year yet. Oh, there we go. The 90s, we finally lost a little bit of value in the 90s, early 90s. We had a flat year in 91, 30% for the decade. The 2000s, of course, were super strong until they weren't. Until the Great Recession, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11. But still, for the decade, they're up 66%. And then the 2010s, 45% after recovering from the Great Recession. And is that as far as the slide goes? There we go. 2020s were already up 39% in 2 years. So we have a winning record here, 90% win rate since 1942. Real estate has been positively appreciating with only 7 down years and 1 flat year. Actually, I think there's more than 1 flat year, but
yeah, this was a truly flat year. And then this year that we rounded to 0 was down like 0.2%. So we rounded it to 0, but it was slightly negative. So we gave it the red coloring. But there's a couple things that I think are really interesting here. You know, coming out of the Great Depression, obviously values were constrained, pulled down, and then just absolutely skyrocketed. You know, we saw some of that kind of incredible, I guess not 130%, but again, coming out of the Great Recession and the mortgage meltdown period. You know, this is national appreciation, but if you were lucky enough to live in Utah, you pretty much double these numbers. I mean, it was just really astounding. And one other thing I think is really interesting is, you know, right now we're going through this banking crisis. So one of the questions is, well, what's going to happen with the banking crisis as it relates to real estate values? And the closest thing that I can pinpoint to that's similar to the current banking crisis that's going on is the S&L crisis. We just wrote a blog post on this, that from 1986 to 1995, there was a massive failure in savings and loans. In fact, 32% over 1,000, the number's 1,043 savings and loans crashed from 1986 to 1995. And the vast majority of those S&L's business was residential mortgage financing. So you had a real liquidity moment where liquidity was being pulled out of the market as it relates to funding mortgages. But look what happened to real estate during that time. You still had, you know, 10% year, 8% year, 7% year, 4% year. All right, this is when it got really tough, down 1%, down less than 1%. And then S&L crisis ends in 1995. And then boom, you go into a really pretty solid decade thereafter. So other than the Great Recession, housing has been insanely resilient. All right, Jake.
I would argue it's going to continue to be so because of that structural shortage of homes.
Yes.
Right. There's just not enough homes.
Yes. Right. More household formations than there are number of homes being built by builders. And that's the real reason for the shortage. Well, this is, you know, kind of getting into the real topic of the day, which is, you know, when does a liability or a debt like a mortgage become like an asset? When does a debt become an asset? And I came up with two ideas. I'll let you stew on that for a minute, Drake, and then I'll give you the two that I came up with and see if you come up with something different. But what this chart does is it shows the price of money, i.e. interest rates, going back 5,000 years. Now, how do they know what interest rates are 5,000 years ago? I don't know. But there was a book written by Homer and Sila called A History of Interest Rates. It was written in 2005. It literally went back to 3000 BC. And then on top of that information, you have information from Bank of America Global, Bank of England, Global Financial Data. So you compile all this data, and this charts the interest rates over 5,000 years. And a couple of takeaways. This obviously is the Great Depression. It's a hugely deflationary time in history. And that was the moment that interest rates hit a 5,000-year low. And then back in the COVID recession, where a lot of us got our mortgage rates from, interest rates hit a 5,000-year low. So the point of this slide is to communicate how rare it is that we are owners of 2.5, 3.5, or 4% mortgages. That is truly astounding and unusual. It's not like that's going to happen every month or every few years. In fact, if you look back at the average 30-year Fannie Mae mortgage rate, your average rate going back over 40 years is closer to the mid to high 7% range. So to have a 4% rate is truly unusual. And to answer the question I led with on this slide, when does a debt become an asset? I believe a debt becomes an asset when the underlying property is or business or whatever that cash generating engine is. But when a property spins off more income from rental income than it costs to service the debt and cover a management expense, then all of a sudden that mortgage becomes an asset because it enables you to own that piece of real estate that spins off the positive cash flow. So for me, when I look at something as a cash flow or liability, a asset or a liability, the answer to that question is, well, does it produce cash flow? And if it produces cash flow, then I have to look at that mortgage as an asset. The other thing that I came up with, Drake, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on this, is when inflation is at a higher rate than your, in this case, probably 30-year fixed mortgage rate. Remember, inflation drives wages, which means our incomes are going up. Inflation drives rents, which means our rental income for those properties are going up. So if I've got a fixed rate mortgage below the rate of inflation, which is going to push wages and rents up, then that liability becomes an asset to me. Any thoughts on that or anything else you'd add?
Yeah, totally agree. And I talked to sort of folks that are interested in sort of stacking up properties and sort of house hacking a lot. What I'll tell them is, look, you buy your home, and as soon as you think you can rent out that home for more than what your mortgage is, it's time to move. Right? So like you're saying, that's when it becomes a liability. In other words, you have to feed it, right, to an asset. It feeds you. So that's powerful. And then, the first thing that came up for me for sure was when if the rate of inflation is higher than your mortgage rate, it's essentially canceling out your mortgage, right? Because if your rate's at 3 and inflation's at 6, that means your money and wages and all that is going up faster than your liability is. So essentially that's free money.
That's right. And over a long period of time, the mortgage payment stays the same. The rental income compounds and moves higher with inflation. And the difference between the rental income and the mortgage payment gets, really meaningful. And we're going to show some examples of this. Robert Kiyosaki was the guy for me, and people have a love him, hate him relationship with Robert because he's a interesting character, right? He is a libertarian. Him and Ron Paul are back to the gold system, and so a lot of people see him as polarizing. But he also is brilliant as it relates to pointing out that that people are stuck inside this cycle that he calls the rat race. Robert also was the one who taught me that something is an asset if it spins off positive cash flow, and it's a liability if it takes money out of your bank account versus putting it in your bank account. So Robert says most people have a price, and they have a price because of human emotions named fear and greed. First, the fear of being without money motivates to work hard. True, yes, that's you got me there. And then once we get a paycheck, greed or desire starts us thinking about all the wonderful things money can buy. A pattern is then set: get up, go to work, pay bills, get up, go to work, pay bills. Their lives are then run forever by two emotions, fear and greed. Offer them more money, and they continue the cycle by also increasing their spending. This is what I call the rat race. So then he goes on to say the people who get out of the rat race the quickest are the people who understand numbers and have a creative financial mind. We escape the rat race by controlling assets that spin off more passive cash flow than we have in outgoing expenses. And that's the moment where you're no longer controlled by fear and greed. You're out of that cycle that Robert describes, and you can now really have kind of this sense of freedom. So I thought that was kind of an interesting framing for this. Now, this is a graphic by Casey, is her last name Franchini?
Franchini, yep.
Franchini, yeah. I did a podcast with her. She is the founder of a company called Brick by Brick Wealth. You can find her at brickbybrickwealth.com. She's a real estate coach. She's a mother of two young children who decided that she wanted to escape the rat race. And so she started selling products on Etsy, saving $1,000 a month with the goal that she was going to save up enough to buy an investment property. And as her and her husband were building their investment empire, if you will, I don't know if she'd call it an empire, but as she was building her way out of the rat race, he said, holy cow, this isn't incremental progress that we're making. It's exponential progress. And so I'll walk you through this graphic real quick. The first 20,000 that she saved came from making $1,000 a month from Etsy, and it took her 20 months to save the $20,000. Then she bought the first house, but now she had $500 in passive income from that home, and she still was making $1,000 from Etsy. So she was saving $1,500 a month now, her positive cash flow plus the Etsy money. So now to save up the next $20,000, she only needed 14 months. And then she goes on to the third home. She's got $1,000 in passive income, $500 from each home, $1,000 from Etsy. Now it only takes her 10 months. And as you follow this equation, right, home number 4 only takes 8 months, 7 months, 6 months. By the time she got to house number 10, she's saving her $20,000 down payment and buying a new home about every 3 months. And this is the exponential potential with real estate investing if you continue to redirect your cash flow into acquiring new properties. And Drake, do you remember the number of years it took her to get to 10 homes?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I can't remember. She said it in her podcast, but I believe it was, within 5 years, she'd gotten from 1 home to 10 positive cash flow rental properties. Suggest you follow her on Instagram. She's very informative and inspirational. I want to just kind of one other path out of the rat race before we really get into some specifics here on deal analyzation and how to market your home and those types of things. This is a spreadsheet that a colleague of Drake and mine created. His name is Greg Selters, and he works at our parent company, Luminate. And he said, I want to be able to show clients a path where they could turn their current property into a rental property, and then 2 years later or 4 years later or 6 years later, kind of keep rolling from primary residence, turn that into a rental property, buy a new property. So I'll kind of walk through this quickly. This is an exercise that usually is an hour-long conversation with a client. But essentially, they had their first property. They had a nice low 2.75% mortgage rate. And the idea was, well, should we sell this home or should we turn it into a rental? And so we walked through this thought experiment. Well, what if you pulled out a home equity line or second mortgage? You'd have a total payment of $2,460 on your home. The rents would be $2,800, so you'd have a little bit of positive cash flow. We take that $110,000 second mortgage, put it down on a new home, and so on and so forth. Every 2 years, you kind of rinse and repeat into your final home, which is your final resting home where you want to retire. And then we say, okay, I'm a good 20 to 25 years out from retirement. So if we did this plan and we assumed that we had 5% annual rent increases and 5% annual appreciation, which is way less than we've seen in the state of Utah, but it's national average is about 4.6%. Utah is almost double that, but let's just use 5%. Well, then where would we be in 20 years? And this is, Drake, this is the hardest thing for people to think about. People think really good, me included, in terms of humans, I should say. We think really well in terms of days, weeks, months, and maybe we are an exceptional human and we're able to execute around our 1 year goal. But humans, by and large, think poorly in terms of decades. Like, what does this compounding rents and appreciation look like over 20 years? And so what this tool enables us to do is to say, look, in 20 years, these 3 properties would be spinning off $25,000 in rents. You'd have $9,800 in mortgage payments on those properties. You'd have a positive monthly income of $16,000 a month, which you could then use to offset your mortgage payment for your final home that you're going to spend your retirement years in or whatever period of life. And you would have earned, based on these purchase prices, appreciating over a 20-year period of time. And this kind of handicaps it. So this says we've owned this home for 20 years, but this home 18 years, this home 14 years, and this home 12 years. It's kind of calculating over the time horizon that we would own those properties. And 20 years in the future, you'd have a $6 million net worth and you'd have $16,000 in positive cash flow. But these are the types of long-term compounding effects that we have a really hard time of visualizing. Anything else you'd add there, buddy?
Yeah, just for like, this is amazing spreadsheet if you want to get really granular, but I always think of for myself in terms of the rule of 72, where you take whatever your rate of return is and divide by 72 or divide 72 by that number, and that gives you your doubling time. So if I think of a long-term amount of property, I'm buying a $500,000 property at a 4%, let's say 5% rate of appreciation that you used here, means the value of that property is going to double in 14 years. So 72 divided by 5 is 14. So I'm going to double my investment. So say I'm buying a $500,000 property that breaks even the day I bought it, right? So renters are making the payment for me. And it's $500,000. So if I own that for 14 years, it's going to be worth $1 million. And I now have $500,000 that someone else paid for me to own, right? And the same thing, I think that people don't really realize that often with rents is that rents double based on that as well. So if you use rent appreciation of 5%, again, your rents are going to double. So day one, you buy that $5,000 property, $500,000 property, the rents are $3,000, but your mortgage is $3,000. In 14 years, your rents are going to be $10,000, right? But I'm sorry, $6,000 because they doubled, but your mortgage is still going to be $3,000 max. So it's just a quick rule of thumb that if you hold real estate long-term, the average historical appreciation is somewhere between 4 and 5%, which means rents and values are going to double about every 15 to 20 years.
Yes. And I think people think about values doubling, right? They've seen that in their own lives.
Yeah.
But rarely do people think about rents doubling. I tell the story, the first 8-plex that my mom and I bought in, I think it was 2001. So let's call it 22 years ago. The units were renting out for $275 per unit. They now rent for $1,500. So they've seen a 500% increase in rent. And people think about price appreciation, but rarely do they think about the power of this rent inflation over long periods of time.
Yeah,
Jake,
that's using of inflation for you, right?
that's right. That's exactly
making
right.
it work for you.
That's exactly right. Well, we found this cool resource. Do you want to walk us through what this is, Drake?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a website for those of you folks that are in Utah. This is a really cool and powerful search tool for looking at real estate. So you can search here just like you would on the MLS realestate.com or Zillow or whatever. But what's cool about this website is that it will actually do the analytics for you on the property that you're interested in. So say you can go search a fourplex and you can see it'll break out the rents, it'll break out the expense factor, the vacancy factor, and it helps you walk through that step by step, so that you can be a more educated investor and you can analyze these properties. So I would highly recommend checking this out. I don't think we have quite time to do a full-on analysis in it, but there is a really good video on the property of sort of how to use it. And the first time you use it, if you decide to log in, it'll ask you what assumptions you want to make, and it teaches you how to analyze property. So if you are looking at different properties and considering rentals, this is a really powerful site. So
yeah, it'll supercharge your financial IQ in terms of deal evaluation much faster than what you could do manually on your own. So a great resource. All right, buddy, let's get tactical. Where do we start? Let's say that somebody says, I see the path. I'm underfunded in my retirement. I want to create cash flow. I want to try to escape the rat race. How do I keep my 3% mortgage and buy a new home that I really want to move my family in?
Yeah. So when folks talk to me like, hey, I'm interested in buying real estate or buying investment property, what should I do? First thing I try to do is look for the lowest hanging fruit. And typically what that is for a lot of people is, my question is, are you in the home that you really want to be in, right? The benefit of doing it, turning your primary home into a rental and buying a new primary, is that you can use primary residence financing to accomplish that. But before you go down that path, there's a couple of steps you want to do on your current home. So if you've owned your current home for a couple of years, you have probably north of 50% equity in that home. So what I try to remind people is, your equity in your home is earning you nothing, right? Your home, the value of your home goes up or down based on the market, not based on how much you have borrowed against it. So the first thing you want to do before you start considering buying a new primary residence is open up a home equity line of credit on your current residence. And my recommendation is to open the biggest HELOC that you can. You can often open up to, we have resources for up to 90%, sometimes even higher than that, I believe. But you can borrow upwards of $500,000 on a home equity line. So why borrow the most that you can if you don't want to use it? Well, one reason is that a home equity line of credit shows on your credit report as a almost like a credit card. And that's really how it kind of operates, right? I explain it to people as it's like a cheap credit card that's tied to your home. You literally get a checkbook and a debit card, and you can write a check for it. The reason you want to have it as large as possible is because, not because you want to use all that money necessarily, but you want to have it available as an emergency fund if you're going to be a landlord, and as an opportunity fund if you're going to be an investor. It allows you to access that money and write checks. If you see a great deal that you want to take advantage of, you have your equity line open, you can write a check for a down payment or an earnest money deposit that day. And as you know, I think people assume and know, when you start landlording, you're going to have problems. Roofs leak, furnaces break. Despite our best efforts, sometimes tenants are, not treat our properties as well as we want them to. And so it's just nice to have that emergency fund available, as well as an opportunity fund for potential other transactions that you want to do. And you don't want to max it out. Say, you don't want to take $100,000 line, max it out, because that's going to report on your credit as a maxed out credit card, and that's going to hurt your credit score. So if you can get a $300,000 line and only use 100,000 of it, great. And the nice thing about a HELOC too is it's not costing you anything if you're not using it. So
Yeah, that's a great point. You can borrow against it, use it to put the minimum down payment on the next house. And then as you have income come in, you can pay down that home equity line on your departing residence. Or as you have positive cash flow from your rent, from that home that you left, that you did occupy, that's now the rental property, as you have positive cash flow, you can use that to pay down the home equity line. And as you pay it down, you're reducing the amount of interest that's accruing on it.
So we did that on one of our fourplexes recently. I opened an equity line on it years ago and hadn't used it, but it was time to do 2 renovations on those units. And so we were able to borrow like $80,000 from the equity line, and renovated both properties, essentially doubled the rents for both of those units. And now that cash flow is paying back the home equity line. Once that's done, we'll just take over that cash flow into our bank account.
What was the increase on the rents? Do you remember?
Gosh, one unit went from 1,200 to 2,100.
Whoa.
And I think the other one went from like 900 to 1,500.
So check this out. So that's 900 on one unit and $600 increase on a second unit. That's $1,500 a month in additional cash flow. Times that by 12 months. That's $18,000 a year in additional cash flow. And it costs you 80,000. So if I take my 18 and divide it by 80, that means you made a 22.5% return, meaning using 80,000 to improve your property, your return on investment for that improvement was 22.5%, being the 18,000 in cash flow. It's one of the things that people don't think about a lot of times, but investing in property you already own to increase the rental income is sometimes the best way to unlock potential additional cash flow.
Cool. So then once you have your home equity line, which you need to do before you leave the property and turn it into a rental, because it's much harder to get a HELOC on a rental property than it is your primary residence, then you can prepare your current home to rent. You can determine your rental value, what you think it's going to rent for, and you want to handle any funky stuff, any obsolescence. I'm trying to think of what we were talking about leading up to this in terms of obsolescence. Josh, do you remember?
Little things like, the rain spout isn't leaking right, and we know eventually it's going to cause rot. The handrail is just a little bit loose going down the back deck. The stone in the backyard shifted because of roots and it's a tripping hazard. Like, this is the time. What you don't want to do is move out of a house and then send a whole bunch of handymen in on top of your renters to fix stuff. So just take time to anything that would be inconvenient or could result in continual erosion of the property or devaluation of the property. This is a great time just to handle it right now. And by the way, it's going to help you get top rents when you go to rent it because it's going to look killer.
Agreed. So definitely want to build your team. And handling obsolescence up front. I think I tell people one of the fastest ways to hate being a landlord is to go do all the repairs and maintenance yourself. I will guarantee you will not want to continue to do that, especially when it's been your primary residence, right? Because then you'll come back to it and the renters might not have taken care of the yard exactly like you would have, or they leave stuff around the property and it doesn't look as good as it did when you were there. That's just going to bum you out, right? So my rule of thumb is that, we have our landscaping crew, our snow crew, our handyman to handle to any small repairs. A plumber is going to be probably your one you want to have at the top of your speed dial list. That seems to be one of the main things we deal with. And of course, a great HVAC team, because it never fails that 4th of July, the air conditioning goes out, right? So you gotta have a great team, and that people that you continually use and build relationships, so that when that HVAC does go out on the 4th of July, they'll take care of you. So remember too that when you pay for these things, these are all business expenses, right? Like we say at the top of the slide, you have to treat this like a business, and so it's a bummer that the drain backed up and you have to hire a plumber for $100. but realize also that that's a tax deduction for you at the end of the year as well.
Great point. That's their pre-tax dollars versus post-tax dollars. Great point.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got your team together. You want to prepare to list your property, right? I would highly recommend hiring somebody that does like real estate photos to do professional pictures, because that is really, really just like selling a house, right? That's really what draws people to your listing and makes them want to rent your place over others. And then of course you save those, and then every time your property comes up, you just have them handy and it's ready to go. And then we use Zillow a lot for setting up our rental profiles. And you can market it there, and you can do all the tenant screening there. You can pull credit. It's kind of a one-stop shop, Zillow Rent Manager. So I found it very helpful. Speaking of that, set up a tenant payment platform. You can do all that stuff through Zillow. We use another software called Doorloop to do our payments, because that just aggregates it well for us. I mean, you can certainly do, I mean, a lot of tenants, even one of our properties, they even use Venmo. That's not my favorite way to go. My partner deals with that property, but on our properties that we own 100%, we use Doorloop, and it's been really handy.
These simplify your life in so many ways, right? Receiving payments, even preparing reports for taxes. It's amazing the technology for single family landlords has grown exponentially in the last 10 years.
And you want to force the tenants into your process, not vice versa, as much as you can, right? Like this, you teach them, like, this is how you pay, set up an account online, you'll have a portal, and you can just do it every month, and it'll just show up automatically ACH in your business bank account. Cool. So now we're on to marketing the home. And in Utah, we have Rentler that is a part of KSL. Of course, you can use Zillow. Some places still use Craigslist. And we wanted to mention Furnished Finder. That is a sort of what's called a midterm rental. So it's generally furnished properties that you could also be used as nightly rentals, but you're renting them for more periods of like a month to 3 months to 6 months. So less than a year, but more than nightly. And those have been really powerful. You'll get, travel nurses, or we just got a corporate guy that's coming into Park City who's going to be working on one of the new golf courses there, and he's going to be there for 6 months. So that can be a pretty powerful thing too. You get a higher rent than a long-term tenant, not as much as a short-term, but it's kind of a sweet spot there. Less work than a nightly rental. Screening applicants, the Zillow Rental Manager is great, like pulling credit and whatnot. You can also use rentready.com. Let's maybe just park on that for a second, Josh. Let's talk about what sort of criteria you're looking at in terms of a tenant, right? Like for example, I like to see a 30% debt to income ratio, right? So in other words, if the rent is $1,000, you want to see that tenant is making $3,000 a month, right?
This is the biggest gotcha in all of Landlordville. I mean, where people really screw up is they don't treat this like a business. They have no standards for credit and payment history. They don't run a background check. They don't run credit. They don't verify income. They meet somebody. They have big, beautiful eyes and cute dimples and nice white teeth. And they go, I'm going to trust you with my $500,000 house. do not do that. Yeah. You wouldn't let somebody drive your $500,000 Lambo or whatever, or give them your checking account, your checkbook with $500,000 in it. This is the difference between people who get in trouble and people who do really well with investment properties. Go through the process of a rental manager platform, Rent Ready. Katrinka just put a comment in here around Rentler has a new tool called Tenant Cloud, but you want to pull credit. If you can do a background check and you can see if they have any what do they call that? A child, a pedophile.
Sex offender.
Yeah, sex offender. That you can find that information online as well. You want to verify with their paycheck stubs that they make a minimum of 3 times the rent. I sometimes like to see somebody's bank account because I want to see where they're spending their money. So don't feel you're handing somebody over a $500,000 asset. Make sure that they have the ability and the willingness to repay. And you can look at somebody's credit and you can say, okay, they've got 20 accounts and 18 of them they paid as agreed. And then they have this student loan that got bumped. And then they had this medical collection. Well, that is somebody who has the intention and the willingness to pay their debts. They just moved and they didn't see that the student loan or the medical bill. So you really want to see, does the person have the ability and the willingness and the pattern of paying? And if you do that, your chances of having something go terribly wrong are decreased by a significant margin.
Yeah, Rachel is asking what's the minimum credit score? And I think to your answer, Josh, I don't really have like a hard minimum because I understand that crap happens to people. But if I'm looking at their credit and like you said, they have a willingness to repay, and I can see that they can clearly afford it from their debt to income ratio and their pay stubs. And we were potentially looking at their bank statement as well to just see that they've got some reserves. And we're getting a good review from their prior landlord, then I would be comfortable down into the mid 600s probably. I mean,
for sure.
Yeah, maybe not too much below 660, but
think of the situation where you're a dual income family and you go through a divorce or God forbid you lose a spouse. But you're looking at someone's credit and you're going, okay, there's 50 accounts here, 20 accounts, and 15 of them were paid as agreed forever. And then 5 of them coinciding with the date of the, somebody passed away or the divorce, these 5 accounts got haywire. But if I look back prior to that time, they were perfect in their payment history. That to me is somebody who has a willingness to pay. They just had a life event. And if I verify their income and maybe I, want a little bit of a higher deposit, that's somebody I would take a risk on because they've shown a willingness and a desire to pay.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Cool. So once we've done that, we sign the lease agreement and there's several resources there, landlordforms.com, Utah Law Lady, Zillow Rental Manager. Again, it's kind of a one-stop shop. It's been working well for us. Get the select lease signed and collect a deposit. I usually like to get a little bit more than a month's worth in terms of deposit, unless it's somebody that I'm slightly concerned about, and then I'll get more. And then communicate to your team, right? You got to let your homeowner's insurance agent know that you no longer live in the property. It's now rental. That will drive down the cost of your homeowner's insurance because you're only insuring the property and not the contents. You want to let your accountant know, right? That's going to change how you're going to file taxes on the property. And you want to start collecting all those records when you hire the plumber, when you hire the landscaper, when you hire whoever, that needs to be tracked because those are now expenses that are lowering your tax bill at the end of the year. Of course, you need to think about talking to an attorney, maybe not for your very first one, but it is a good idea to start thinking about setting up an LLC and deeding that property into the LLC and opening an LLC bank account. The bank account receives the rents and pays all the bills. And that's an easy way, especially with one property. If you just have that one property in an LLC bank account that operates itself, it's almost a built-in P&L for you at the end of the year, right? If you're disciplined about making sure the only things that are only bills are paid out of that account and only rent comes into that account, you've just simplified your tax time massively.
Super well said. There's a bunch of questions we're going to get to in about 60 seconds. So don't think I'm ignoring you. These questions are fantastic. We'll just kind of wrap this up and then go from there. We talked about, Drake, when you're about to take on an additional mortgage, now you have 2 mortgages. There's more risk there, right? Like there's more things in the world of possibilities that can go wrong. So we talked about, hey, open up an equity line for as much as you can get it. You can get 300,000. and you only need 50,000 to buy your new home, open it for 300,000 because you've got a safety net underneath you. The other thing that I was just thinking about, and we throw this in here today, is that savings accounts now are paying over 4.5%. So I just moved all my business accounts, all my trust accounts for my rental properties that have liquidity funds attached to them that I used to be making 0 on. I moved them over to Luminate Savings. We're now making 4.5%. So if you're going to take on a new asset and a new mortgage, a new house and a new mortgage, and you're going to have an investment property now, be thinking about what are the things that I can do to make this safer. And having more liquidity and having that liquidity paying you a decent rate of interest is just another way where you can insulate yourself a little bit from risk. So just an idea for anyone who may have business accounts or something making 0, stop that and go get yourself a decent return. Drake, I think this is the last slide and we're jumping into Q&A.
Yeah, so we'd love to help you guys. We can generate these real estate report cards for either the new property that you want to buy or your current property. This is the same kind of analytics that folks like Don Mullen and these hedge fund type folks are using to make their investment decisions. And it's the kind of information that you want as well. You want to be looking at homes built versus household formations. You want to be looking at unemployment rates. You want to be looking at inventory and demographics. This is the kind of stuff that can help you make a sound investment decision. So just reach out to us and we can build these for any zip code or property that you're interested in.
Yeah. I mean, the difference between Don Mullen and most US households is, well, one, he has access to $60 billion. Right. He's got a background on Wall Street. Let's not underestimate that. But he also has the data and he has the analytics, and he can see, if I got a 1% unemployment rate and our birth rate is off the charts and the average age is 26 to 37 years old, which is first time home buyer land, and builders aren't keeping up with demand, it's not rocket science to say that rents and prices are going to go up. But that real estate report card will essentially encapsulate all of that, what we call professional grade analytics around a community or a neighborhood, and then give you all that data to help you, have a comfort level or not about a specific community.
Yeah, that site we mentioned, UBDO as well, has an amazing chat feature that you can ask all sorts of questions, real estate related questions to, and is a very powerful analytical tool. So keep that one in mind.
Awesome. All right, let's go through some questions here. Do you want to pick one out, Drake? I'm looking as well. I just answered a question from Jen in the chat. 2 really good questions. She asked, do we typically hire a landscaper? And would you suggest a home warranty? So I answered that in the chat. Okay.
Yeah, I've definitely used home warranties. I don't do it as a rule, but we've done it on a couple of properties and it actually has paid off nicely for us.
Yes. Nice. All right. There's a bunch of questions in the Q&A side. So
yeah.
Keon, I hope I'm saying that name right. I'm sorry if I'm not. What's a good house to rent out? Obviously, a $2 million luxury home may not be a good candidate. Is there a price sweet spot? You want to take a swing at that, Drake?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree a little bit. I would say a $2 million property might not be the one that I want to treat as a rental. I don't know about a sweet spot necessarily. It's just how you got to think through who's going to be renting, right? Like, there's going to be a top end that someone's going to be willing to pay in rent, right? Yes. And at some point, that person's just going to say, well, look, it just makes more sense for me to buy, right? So I don't know exactly what that is, but my gut would tell me somewhere around an $8,000 to $10,000 a month payment is about the max that somebody's going to want to rent for, at least in Utah. Maybe that's different in New York City, right? But
yeah, I think that the price that is the sweet spot for me is the price where you can get cash flow, and that may change in different markets. In other words, I might be able to pick up a $400,000 starter home, townhome that maybe I own and I have a 2% mortgage on that I don't want to get rid of. That will make a great rental in Salt Lake. And then perhaps you've got a really ridiculously low mortgage rate on a property in Park City that is a $2 million property. And you're like, man, I'm going online, I'm looking at the homes for rent. I can get $15,000, $20,000 for this property, and my mortgage payment's $8,000. Well, I would seriously consider that, because you have to realize that the people who are going to spend $20,000 a month in rent, and those people are out there. I know that sounds crazy, but they're out there. They're not in as high of numbers as Drake mentioned, but in a resort community like Deer Valley or Park City, like they're out there. And typically those people have high regard for their credit. They have assets, and they don't want to damage your home. They don't want you going after their credit. They don't want you getting a judgment against them. So I would answer that as the sweet spot is the price range in which you can get a positive cash flow. But of course, if I'm turning a $2 million home into a rental property, I need to make sure that I have enough liquidity to handle that home in a down market. And if something happens, like I need to have more liquidity if that's the game I'm going to play.
Yeah, what came up for me, Ed, I just remembered, I mean, we have multiple friends that are building houses, and those families need somewhere to stay while they're building their house. So I have two friends, you and I both do that have rentals in high-end markets, Sun Valley and Park City, where folks are building their houses, which takes a year or 18 months on some of those nicer houses, that they're renting out their properties and cash flowing like crazy. So yeah, I agree, Josh. There's not a right line there.
Great point. Man, there's a really good question. And then we missed this in the presentation. Dylan said, when in this process are you starting to put offers on a new home? So if we go back to this, Drake, right? Like first thing we're going to do is we're going to open the HELOC, prepare your home to rent, determine the value, handle any issues. You start to build your team who's going to manage that property. My guess is most of these people, but maybe just getting in communication with them and saying, hey, I'm turning this into a rental property. I want to build a partnership with you here that if I need help on a Saturday, are you willing to help me? Prepare to list your property for rent and set up payment platforms. So somewhere right around here, I'm starting that. As soon as I know that this property is going to positive cash flow, and I'm handling the obsolescence, I'm probably preparing and starting to write offers on new homes. Would you agree with that, Drake?
I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
And in that time, obviously, you want to be talking to a lender and making sure you know what your numbers are on your new purchase, and thinking about, okay, how much cash flow am I going to get from my departing home that can offset my mortgage on my new larger mortgage on my new home.
Yep. And Dylan, I want to give you one other tip. You could just beta test this. You could just, like, if you're just curious and you want to put your toe in the water, hire a great photographer company to come in. I think professional photos are like $150. Have them take incredible photos, go up, do the market research, stick the property up there for rent, and just see how many phone calls you get. And then when they call, say, no, it already rented. No, it already rented. I'm not ready yet. But you can kind of just do like marketers do this all the time. They run a campaign or an ad or a billboard, and they're just eliciting response. And then they go, holy crap, that response was incredible. Now I'm going to build a business to actually fulfill the advertisement. I just wanted to see if there was a need for that in the market. So if you really just wanted to do this cautiously, you could do something like that and just kind of take baby steps with it. Keon says with today's rates, it's really hard to cash flow in many markets. Absolutely. Yeah, especially in high cost of living areas. Buying a new property with investment property rates in the 6% range can be hard to cash flow without huge down payments. And that's why we suggest the best first investment property many times is converting the home that you already have significant equity in, that you can pull a home equity line on so you have some security and a fail safe. And if you've got yourself a 2.75% mortgage rate, then many times, because you've got equity and you have the lower mortgage rate, you can create a positive cash flow. If you can't, then think about, how could I improve the home enough to create a positive cash flow? Could I add an accessory dwelling unit? Could I have a lockout basement? Is there something I could do to the house? Like Drake mentioned, furnished finders, you rent the house out fully rented. usually between 30 days and 12 months. So it's not a nightly rental, it's not an annual rental, but maybe if it was furnished, you could positive cash flow. Like you've got to kind of figure out, is there an angle to get yourself to that place of creating positive cash flow?
Yeah, sometimes you could even like add a wall, right? Maybe you have a 2-bedroom and you can spend $1,000 framing out a wall and drywalling it. Now you've got a 3-bedroom, and that can take your rent up another $700 a month, which makes a non-working property into a working property.
Yep. And Matt McNally asked a great question. What do you guys think will help free up some inventory? Are builders ramping up? I think that builders are getting a little less fearful with 6% interest rates as opposed to 7% interest rates. Builders were very fearful, and the number of housing permits plummeted in the fourth quarter and fourth quarter of 22, first quarter of 2023. Now demand is coming back, and I think builders are throttling back up. But here's the problem: to buy a piece of land, get it entitled, get your improvements with curb, gutter, sewer, all that kind of stuff, get your lots subdivided, get through the neighbors who are, throwing a fit that there's going to be development and more density in their areas, to get all the way through planning to zoning, and then to build vertical construction. You're talking about 18 to 24 months on a good project. If you have a problem, if you run into some issue, like I don't know how many of you have seen the Cottonwood Mall. That's what are we 6 or 7 years into that project, still not the first unit being delivered yet. So there is significant constraints from a purely bureaucracy process of entitlement and getting that done that is going to limit the number of new homes that can be created. Not to mention, we kind of are running out of land between the Oakers and Wasatch. And so, there's only so much. So I see, yes, perhaps we're going to get more building, and perhaps things are going to go vertical and we're going to get more density. But I don't think that the numbers have shown in the last 10 years, household formations, which is when, kids move out of their households, out of their parents into their own homes. Household formations in Utah and net migration into Utah is vastly exceeding the number of household finishes, which is household completion, which is when a builder completes a house. So I don't know. I don't see any path out of this housing shortage anytime soon, I guess is my answer. Do you answer that differently at all, Drake?
I totally agree. Brian was asking, what if I want to be completely hands-off with fixing, listing, marketing, screening? Is it still worth it if I use property management service from the onset? Any property management recommendations in Utah County? Well, I think, yeah, if you want to just make your life simple and just watch money come into your bank account, then a property management's fine. That costs anywhere, my experience, between 6 and 10% of your revenue. So as long as it works in your numbers, then go for it. They have varying skill sets. So I don't know any in particular in Utah County that I would recommend. I don't know. Do you have any, Josh, that you love?
Yeah, I'm going to drop one into the chat. I have not personally used this company, but I know the gentleman who runs. His name is John Deviser, and I've had a business relationship in terms of real estate. I've done mortgages for him, and I know people who have had him manage their properties. He's excellent to deal with. I consider him to be a very high level of integrity. He's grown the Rise properties under management like exponentially. They've been extremely successful, which tells me they're doing something right because they're getting people to bring them more properties to consistently manage. And the people that I know who have turned properties over to them have been a big fan of his. So I would feel comfortable recommending Rise, even though I haven't used them personally. So I'll drop that in both the Q&A and the chat. Somebody said, how quickly after you purchase your primary residence, this was Joy, thanks Joy, can you rent it out? So there's a restriction on the deed of trust of every residential mortgage that says that you have the intention, every owner occupied residential mortgage that says you have the intention to live in the property for 12 months. That doesn't mean if you only live in it for 10 months and then something changes in your life, you don't go to jail. They don't call the mortgage due, but you shouldn't be intentionally going out, essentially being fraudulent, right? If it was your intention to buy a home, live in it for 3 months and turn it into a rental property, and you signed the deed that says I intend to live there for 12 months, that's fraud. So as long as you have the intention to be there for 12 months, if in 6 months, kids need to go to a different school, jobs change, nobody's going to throw a tissy fit over that. Is there a way to buy a new primary house without having your current primary rented out first, without the mortgage counting against the 36% debt to income ratio? Yes, there's a couple of ways to do that. Number one, there is a program. Did you ever hear back on that bridge loan program, Drake, where we asked them how long they could have both properties?
Yeah, there's no limit in terms of how long.
So there's a bridge loan product that we use that will essentially let somebody buy a new home before they move out and sell their existing home. But that product doesn't have a limit on how long you can have two homes. And that product excludes the payment from the departing resident. So that's one potential solution. Another potential solution is you sign the lease agreement and you bank the deposit, but you say your move-in date isn't until July 1st or June 15th. And then as soon as you have that lease agreement and the signed deposit, you can use that income or 75% of that income to offset the mortgage. So there is some strategy that can be done there to help you navigate through that, Andrea.
Also, you mentioned the 36% debt to income ratio. It's actually, for people with good credit, we can get up to 50%. And so that, depending on the situation, you may just be able to afford and cash flow both payments.
Yes.
If you're thinking it's 36, because it's certainly, we see clients every day get approved up to 50.
Yep. And there was somebody who had their hand up, but I don't see it. I don't see the hand still raised. So maybe they put their hand down. If I missed you, I'm so sorry. Feel free to raise your hand again and I'll try to bring you off mute.
Patrico is asking best resource to determine market rents. I usually just go pretend I'm a renter and just go shopping on Zillow or Rentler or apartments.com or whatever, and just pretend I'm a renter. I want to live in this area. I need 2 bedrooms. I need, the similar criteria to your unit. And I just go play on the internet and figure out, is my property nicer than this or not?
Exactly right. Same thing realtors do, right? When they want to know what your home's worth, they look for what home's sold for. As a landlord, if I want to know what my property is going to rent for, I look for what other properties that are similar are renting for. And a lot of these, like Rentler and what have you, Zillow, you can put in, I want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a 2-car garage and a backyard in West Jordan. So you can get pretty specific in it helping you find those comparable rentals. Keon says, you can make a property cash flow with enough down payment, but that could exclude many people from being able to afford a property. Can you comment on that? Yes. That's why we suggest going the owner occupied route. And let me give you a couple of thoughts there. Let's say you were to buy a duplex and you lived in one side. So you put a minimum amount of down payment and then you offset part of the payment by renting out the other duplex. You've probably heard the term house hacking before. Basically what house hacking means is you essentially find a way to monetize the property, i.e. renting out rooms, renting out an accessory dwelling unit, renting out the basement, which you turn into a separate locked out kind of a situation. And you create enough income from the property by renting out parts of the property that you live in a smaller portion or whatever portion of the property, and it helps offset, or in some cases completely covers the rent. Now, all of us aren't going to want to have 5 roommates, but if I was 27 years old and I wasn't married and I was trying to figure out how do I get my toe in the market, how do I get a foothold in here so I can start controlling assets, I would absolutely rent out 4 rooms. I'd keep the master bedroom for myself. and I would live with the inconvenience for 2 years and then figure out how, at that point, if I could turn that into a full-time rental, if I could sell that and move my equity into another property. Like, you have to get in the market. The market is doing this. It has for the last 30 years, besides for a 3-year breather on the worst economic event since the Great Depression, right? I'm alluding to the Great Recession. But besides that, the market's just been taking off. And if you don't get in, you just get left behind. So figure out a way creatively to get into the market, even if you have to do it inconveniently where you're renting out some of those rooms.
Edwin had a good question about using a credit card and a HELOC, or just a HELOC to pay monthly expenses. So I don't pay any monthly expenses on the HELOC. In my mind, the HELOC is an emergency fund and an opportunity fund, and that's kind of it, right? I'll use it to like remodel a unit, but I'm not using it to like cover the lot landscaper or whatever for the month. Or I would do a landscaping project with it, but not pay the landscaper on a monthly basis or weekly basis. What we are doing though, is we're gonna, for our business account, we're gonna open, we have one for one of our old business accounts, but we're gonna open a credit card for a new business account that we're working on that holds our rentals, just so that if we do have some of those expenses, we can use a credit card, get miles for it, right? And then pay that credit card off every month with the cash flow. So that's just another benefit that you can be accruing. So yeah, I wouldn't be using a credit card for monthly, general HELOC for monthly, but a credit card where you can get some additional benefits. I could see value in that.
Yes, but taking the additional cash flow you get from the property, the positive cash flow, and paying down the home equity line, for sure. That's the direction we want cash to go. From the renters to pay down the home equity line, so then you can use that home equity line again to eventually buy another property or just have a bigger, safety net.
Yeah, so every time I use my home equity line, my immediate goal is to turn around and pay that off as quickly as possible, because now I have more dry powder to go play with for my next deal.
Yep, you got it. I think we answered pretty much all the questions. Anybody have any other questions that we can answer for you? Speak now or forever hold your breath.
Or just reach out. You're welcome to email, text, call, and we're happy to get into a personal conversation if you want to get into details.
And hey, Laura dropped a nice reference in here for a property manager, it looks like. So thank you, Laura, for the testimonial there. Yeah, feel free to give us a call if you would like a real estate report card. So the first thing that I would do if I was contemplating this, I would want a real estate report card for the area that my current home is in. I'd want a real estate report card for the area I want to move to. And I would want to just check out the economic viability of those two areas. What are the probability that prices are going to go up based on supply and demand, unemployment rates, wage growth, all those factors. Then once I go, okay, this thing has wings, then I start to look at how much rents could I get. So feel free to email us or contact us. We're happy to walk you through that process and answer questions and get you the real estate report card. Hey, Drake, do you want to drop your, actually just let me do this, Drake, because we even thought through how to put your contact information on here. So here's Drake's contact information. Feel free to email or call or text. You like Saturday nights at 8 p.m. Calls, right, Drake?
Those are my favorite.
All right, everybody, that's a wrap. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure, Drake. Excellent job. Thanks, everybody. It was wonderful to be with you tonight, and hope everybody has a great evening.
Thanks, you guys.
See you, buddy.